We really need protection from temptation. Now remember, God sends trials, not temptations. God never sends temptations to us. He only sends neutral trials. And that neutral trial, as it's leading us toward a point, we're supposed to see where it's going and say, God, I don't want that trial to lead me to a temptation to sin. Deliver me. And we run to him. Now back to James, and let's go from Matthew toward the back of your Bible, the book of James, and look at chapter 1 with me. And as we're turning to James, that little 5-chapter epistle, and so this is what James says, and we saw this last week. Trials, which God is the author of. God sends trials our way. He's just always pitching them our way. And he is sending those trials because as we are not useful to God. He wants to refine us. It's kind of like we're all 2x4s that need, to be cut and shaped and nailed into usefulness for him. And those trials are the shapers. And so they lead us to be tested, our faith, and it produces patience that God is never through with us and always at work. It gives us a life that's approved by God, and it leads to people that respond to God's trials by faith. There's an eternal reward that'll never be taken away from us, a crown of life that's associated with this life of faith. Now, temptation starts in verse 13. God doesn't give us temptations. You can see that. God is not tempted, nor does he tempt anyone. But look at this. Temptations, but every man is tempted when he's drawn away by his own lust or his desires. Temptations are always fed by lusts. Lusts are down there smoldering and trying to feed those temptations to inflame and do what it said in Bonhoeffer's deal. They always lead to sin, and the result is death. So we saw that last time. So basically, James teaches 4 practical lessons about temptation. I'll just go through them real quickly in the text. Number 1, look at verse 13. Temptation is inevitable. Notice what it says. Let no one say when he is tempted. The first lesson is how inevitable to life is temptation. Note, James doesn't say if you're tempted. He doesn't say if somehow, some way, sometime in your life you get tempted. He says when you're tempted. You're going to be tempted. Just wait. Temptation is all around us. It's just a part of life, and it's part of this fallen world. But look at the second half of verse 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. Why? Because God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. God's immutable. He doesn't change. Temptation is inevitable. You cannot avoid it. It's just part of life. God never sends temptation. Never blame it on him. He doesn't author temptations. He is not temptable. He is immutable, changeless, and he doesn't tempt us. Our flesh, our lusts, the world, the devil, not God. Thirdly, lust is avoidable. Notice what it says in verse 14. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. You and I choose to be drawn away by our lusts. You see, in 1 Corinthians 13, or chapter 10, we're going to see that temptation is always pursuing us. It's always chasing after us. And we slow down and allow it to overtake us. And we allow it into our life. And that's what lust is avoidable. This temptation when we're drawn away by our own desires and enticed. It's the key. Temptation is spurred on by lust. And lust can either be fed or starved. That's what the epistles are about. Ephesians 4, Colossians 3, Romans 6, all those passages, and Titus 2, all say we can say no, deny, mortify, and starve our lusts. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Or we can feed them. You see, lusts are reptilian. You know what that means? They get bigger. The more you feed them, the more you exercise them, they just grow. They're like dinosaurs. And you meet some people, I meet some people, we all know some people that are very elderly and are surrounded by these gigantic dinosaur sins that have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger their whole life. And God says, that's a choice. You're keeping and feeding and exercising those lusts. No, lust is avoidable. Verse 15, why? Because sin is horrible. Then, look what it says in verse 15 of James 1. Then when lust or desire has conceived, by the way, the word is epithumia. Thumos speaks of strong passions. Epi means really strong. Lust is extra strong desires for the flesh, for your eyes, for the lust of the eyes, or for pride, for self-promotion. But everyone, when desire is conceived, or lust, or epithumia, it gives birth to sin. There are the facts of life. Lust conceives with our will, and the offspring that's conceived is sin. You see, lust approaches us, and we're tempted to respond to that lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, or the pride of life. And we, at that moment, comes right up to the fence, and here we are, and it's coming toward us. And either we look away and see God crouching down with his arms out, or we turn our back and embrace, and lust conceives within us and brings forth sin. And doesn't end there. Sin is horrible. Look at this. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. And as Bonhoeffer said, joy in God is extinguished. And we feel miserable, distant, almost unsaved, dirty, and awful.